I'd like to welcome you to BeMoreNews.com, the news before the news, where we uncover the truth. Here at the University of Baltimore with candidate Higginbotham. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
How's it feel?
Feels good. Feels real good. I've been running hard for the last couple of days, nonstop, 24/7. This election is going to be a sprint. It's coming fast, February 4th. So I'm going to go hard and long because it's important for people to know who I am and what I've done. I may not have the highest name recognition, but I've accomplished a lot of things in my 32 years at the University of Baltimore Law School and working in the community. And I want people to know about those things because I think if they find out about them, they'll say, this is a good person, this is a decent person. It's not about Higginbotham winning, it's about the 7th Congressional District winning.
So tell me about some of those past successes that would indicate that you are the best candidate.
Well, I started out volunteering with the Public Justice Center. It's the largest public interest law firm in the state of Maryland. I ended up serving as president of the Public Justice Center for several years in the early 90s when I first got here. And we accomplished a number of important things. We helped out poultry workers who were having difficult times on the Eastern Shore, bad labor conditions and low wages and difficult working conditions. We also helped out homeless children who didn't have legal rights to public school access, and we also represented physically handicapped individuals to get access to public buildings. So I'm very proud of that. I also created a scholarship program at that time between the University of Baltimore Law School and the 4 Maryland HBCUs. Very proud of that. It's a unique partnership, the only majority law school partnering with HBCUs in the country. We've helped over 100 individuals get into law school, and not only do they get in, but they've been taking over the law schools. They've been doing extremely well, beating all of the predictors. And the LSAT score says, hey, you're supposed to get this GPA in your first year in law school. We've been beating all the predictors. We had the #1 student in the entire first year class was one of our scholars a couple of years ago, and so I'm very proud of that. Diversity and excellence can go hand in hand, and that's what my professional career has stood for. I served as a legal advisor to Senator Mikulski and Senator Cardin over a 12-year period. I was involved in the selection and identification of federal judicial nominees. I'm very proud of that involvement, not only because we have excellent judges that were selected, but also because they were very diverse. Over 50% women, over 25% African Americans. That's what the scholarship program was all about. That's what my service as a legal advisor to Senator Mikulski was all about. Diversity and excellence can go hand in hand. That's what I've stood for 32 years.
What do you take on this criminal justice system? America has 5% of the world's population, yet we have 25% of the world's inmate. 44% of them are black men. Black women are the fastest growing demographic, and African Americans overall are only 13-14% of the population.
It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a tragedy, and it's got to change. I certainly would fight hard against it. Let me tell you what my background is. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was stopped by the police a whole lot. I would go home, tell my dad, hey, I got stopped by the police again, Dad. I didn't do anything wrong. He's an old school kind of guy. Grew up during Jim Crow. He said life isn't fair. Guess what? It should be more fair. Not only in America, but in the 7th Congressional District. It should be more fair for those African Americans who are wrongfully incarcerated, and also for those African Americans who are getting out of prison. We need to reduce the barriers in reentry, and I'm committed to doing that. We need to make sure that there are no barriers and obstacles in terms of preventing individuals who have served their time from getting back in the political process and from getting employment that where they can pay for themselves and afford help for their families. So I'm all about reentry programs, reducing barriers, and I will fight very hard to see that that's done with specific legislation to make that happen.
In April 2015, the city of Baltimore was rocked with the Freddie Gray unrest. Since then, there's been a lot of attention as it relates to police and consent decrees. What are your thoughts on the streets of Baltimore, the high violence, the criminalization of African Americans, and how all of this fits together?
Well, 3 things I think we need to do, and I was happy to speak out during the Freddie Gray situation. I think police-community relations need to be greatly improved, and I was very disappointed in terms of the quality and the activities of the Baltimore Police Department. The monitor is an important step, but we need to do three things. One, we need to have additional data, and that's where the federal government can come into play. Federal government can provide money and guidelines to get additional data as to what's going on. Who's being discriminated against? Who's being stopped? Who's being wrongfully stopped? What is their race? And so additional data will help us to figure out what we need to do. We also need to have cameras on all police officers 24/7, because we need to know what's happening when individuals are stopped. Federal government can pay for that program to make sure that happens. In addition, we need civilian control in terms of the police. We had a civilian review board here that had no power. They couldn't fire bad police officers. That should be changed. So we do those three things: gather the data, get better police community relations with civilian review, and also cameras on all officers 24/7. I think that will be a step in the right direction.
Professor Higginbotham, what uniquely qualifies you to be state senator? Congressman.
Here we go. Seventh congressional
of the
district.
7th, yes.
There we go. One is that I have constitutional knowledge. I've been teaching for 32 years about the Constitution, about the democratic process. I have the knowledge, and the knowledge is important. We got a constitutional crisis going on in Washington, D.C. It is a tragedy, and a constitutional lawyer is what's necessary for this constitutional crisis. I can come in on day one and deal directly with Donald Trump, deal directly with what's happening in Washington, D.C., and I think that's a very, very important and powerful aspect to why I'd be a good congressperson.
Well, let's use that as a segue. Did Donald Trump abuse the office of the presidency?
Facts are very stubborn things. John Adams, our second president, said that. Facts are very stubborn things. If you look at the facts are pretty clear. Donald Trump in the Ukrainian situation was basically arms for dirty politics, arms for dirt on Trump's political opponents, particularly Joe Biden. And so when you look at that, that's exactly what the founders were concerned about. In the Constitution, that's why they have the impeachment process, in order to deal with abuses of power. And this is an abuse of power. And what I said in my editorial that I wrote yesterday, what I said in the editorial was Trump needs to resign. Why? 3 reasons. If he goes forward with this with this trial in the Senate, it's going to do 3 things. It's going to create 3 problems. One, it's going to continue to undermine the respect and belief that we have in our democratic agencies, like the FBI and the CIA. Trump continues to criticize their evaluations, their investigations, and it continues to erode the confidence that Americans have in these organizations. 2, Trump's requirement of blind loyalty on the part of Republicans in the legislature is problematic to our separation of powers principle. This is one of the things that makes America so special. Separation of powers. We have 3 separate and distinct branches of the federal government: the executive branch, the legislative, and the judicial. And Trump's continual criticism of the judicial branch is going to further erode the respect that Americans have for the independence and objectivity of that Supreme Court. So I see a problem with the separation of powers principle if Trump goes forward. Third, and most important, his rhetoric, his divisive rhetoric, is going to continue to divide Americans and continue to exacerbate conflict, not only between rich and poor, not only between Democrats and Republicans, but also between the races. He has been very divisive. What we need is somebody who is a uniter, not a divider. We need to get rid of President Trump. He needs to either resign or he needs to be removed by the Senate. So it's time for profiles and courage. It's time for these senators, no matter Democrat or Republican, to stand up for principle. That's what they need to do.
Did he obstruct a congressional investigation?
Absolutely. Nobody's testifying. Nobody from the Republican side is testifying. None of the individuals that have been subpoenaed are testifying because Trump ordered them not to. And that's obstruction of Congress. Clear. The facts are clear. The impeachment was done correctly, and I applaud those Democratic members of the House for their courage.
Final thoughts.
Final thoughts on Michael Higginbotham running for the 7th Congressional District. Please take a look at my candidacy, higginbothamforcongress.com. I think if you go on the website, you'll see what I'm about. You'll see what I stood for 32 years. And I think for many of you, what I've done will resonate, and you'll say, hey, the 7th Congressional District can benefit from this individual serving in Congress. Higginbotham for Congress.
Good deal. Keep watching BeMoreNews.com, the news before the news, where we uncover the truth.